This is Chad Woolley with the IDE group in the Create stage. And today I'm going to talk about a Gitlab Velocity Board Chrome extension that I created. This is working towards this OKR for the Create engineering efficiency. And to not bury the lead, I'll give a quick demo and then a long explanation of what we're doing and why. So if we look over here, this is the iteration planning board for the remote development group. This is our actual board. And you see I've got, apologies for the cough, I'm a little bit sick, this extension installed. And if you click calculate iterations, it will automatically calculate the past iterations that you've done, the past 4 iterations, and based on that calculate your velocity. And based on your velocity, it will flow the current and future iterations and tell you when you can predict, based on your current velocity, the stories to be completed in what iteration. So backing up, let's talk about what we're doing and why. So the original impetus behind this MVC was this report that I generated as we were coming up to the 16.0 release and asking the question of whether we were going to be able to make the initial release of the remote development feature by the 16.0 release. And this is just a quick Ruby script that I threw together, but it was able to tell us, okay, based on that point in time, which was April 24th, that no, we indeed, based on the current prioritize stories and estimates, and some that weren't estimated, that we were not going to make the 16.0 release. So this was instrumental in helping us realize, okay, what scope did we have to cut to have a realistic, reality-based chance of delivering remote development in the 16.0 release. And the happy ending that story is we did. By cutting a lot of the scope, and which was mostly around process overhead and how we got the integration branch merged. So backing up even further, what is that based on? So it's very different than the standard GitLab product flow. It's primarily based on pivotal tracker, which is based on velocity. So backing up further, what is velocity? It's a standard concept that Agile teams have used pretty much since the dawn of Agile before the last millennia. And it's standard in XP and now standard in most Scrum approaches. It's alternative to Kanban, which is sort of a work in process driven model. But with velocity, you estimate based on a small scale. Usually it's I prefer Fibonacci, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8. And you have to break up small stories, and as you complete them, you add them up, you average how many you got completed in each past iteration, and divide by the number of past iterations, and then that's your velocity, and that lets you predict, okay, well, based on that, this is how many stories or issues that I can complete in future iterations, everything else remaining the same. The team, the experience of the team, the availability of the team, etc. And so, just to get an idea of how this works, let's look at Pivotal Tracker, which is a very popular tool that with small teams to implement this process. So we see we've got the icebox, which is unprioritized stuff, the current iteration and backlog, and done. So these are all the stories that we've got done. These gray things are the iteration markers. You can see they have the date ranges. So the oldest stuff is here at the top right in the past. And as we flow down, we go into closer to the future. Here's the current iteration, which is right now. And then flowing into the future is the iterations coming up. So the emergent nature of this means that, okay, currently there's 5 points in the current iteration, but if I were to drag this big 5-point story up here, it would automatically say, well, your velocity is 5, and you've already got 2 points in this iteration. You're not going to complete it, but you'll have enough left over here. So it automatically calculates them on the fly. But if we just did a 2-pointer, okay, well, that one would fit in the iteration, and then it would push these 2 down, and the 6 would be calculated. 1 left over, so you could get 5 done. So it automatically lets you reprioritize on the fly in an iteration planning or refinement meeting to say, okay, what do we need to do? What priority decisions do we need to make to be able to meet our goals? And this is a nice feature that Tracker has. You can have these special types of stories that are called releases. So for example, this is an initial demo. So it's got to happen around here. Doesn't really matter when it happens. But the beta launch, that's maybe got a hard date on it, 22nd of June, for example. So all of these stories and before must be completed before the beta launch. But based on the current velocity, which is 5, that is going to happen right here, 22nd of June, in this iteration. So this tells us, well, we're definitely not going to get all of this stuff done before the beta launch based on our current velocity. So we either have to push out the date or cut a lot of scope or do something to make this plan match the reality, because just saying that the team is magically going to do whatever 2 to 3 times the amount of work they normally do is not based in any form of reality and not healthy either. So what I did to try to get this working with Gitlab boards was it took some things. You can see here, like by default, we have these 3 panes here. Unprioritized, that corresponds to the done panel over here, and then prioritized corresponds to the current and backlog, and done corresponds to done. But there's several limitations with the current GitLab implementation of iterations and boards that make it not possible to work this way by default out of the box, and drove this plugin is the next iteration of how can we get something like this in the GitLab product. The first iteration was just to make the little report in Ruby. So iteration cadences don't have this paradigm. They assume that all issues are manually assigned to iterations. Definitely not like Tracker, where you can drag things around and things will automatically recalculate as you drag them around. Secondly, iteration cadences, the way velocity is currently implemented is that they don't have a concept of a running velocity that spans. A velocity is only calculated for stories within a single iteration, which is not useful for this type of estimation that we're trying to do. We use past iteration velocity to predict when future issues will span future iterations. And board lists themselves have a few limitations. For example, if you have an iteration list in a board, it can only show a single iteration. So that means you can't have it show multiple iterations like this in the current and backlog or the done either. Each of these would be a separate list in the GitLab current implementations of iteration-based lists in boards. Secondly, boards can only show open issues. So that means, for example, in Tracker, here's one issue that's already been closed, but it's in the current iteration. It was closed in the current iteration just now, so it should show up there. But in GitLab, it would not show up. For example, if you look over here, there's actually one closed story in the current iteration, but it's not showing up in this prioritized list. So, and nothing is in the done, of course. And lastly, the ordering in the prioritization can be a little bit confusing. So that's why we're going to have to work with this pretty strictly. These are the 3 labels. This is the only board. We can't show any other lists to drag around things on this board or on any other boards, or that will mess up the prioritization of these lists, the ordering of these issues in the prioritized list, which is the most important thing. So I think we're going to add maybe a little export import functionality to back that up just in case they do get screwed up somehow. So that's why we're doing this. So now I'll do a little deeper demo now that you understand what's going on of how this works. So all of the unprioritized stuff is here. You know, if we wanted to see the open tab, we could, just to see, you know, maybe there's some stories that don't yet have a workflow label assigned to it. But generally you can keep that off to keep it simple. And these are scoped labels, so they're mutually exclusive. And if you click calculate iterations, you can see it gives the last 4 iterations. You can pick how many iterations it averages over here, and the average of that is a velocity of 19, and it flows the issues. So you can see here it's also this panel, which was completely empty, got automatically populated with these little fake they're not real issues. They're not draggable, they're not editable. You actually shouldn't attempt to edit this at all. You should probably totally refresh the page, because all bets are off with the way we're manipulating this DOM, and who knows what it would do to view under the covers. It's purely for informational purposes. But we have these closed issues, and there's even one here at the top. You notice that that one's not there because prioritized lists don't show, label lists don't show closed issues by default, but we've put that one in there, and it's linkable, and they show the velocity. So our velocity is 19, and you can see indeed 19 points fit in here, and then these next 3 issues, which add up to 9 points, flowed into next week's iteration, because we're not going to get them done in this iteration. So you can override the number of iterations to average. Like that 4 weeks ago was sort of a little bit of an unsustainable pace leading up to that. Let's just look at the last 2. So, now our velocity is 13, and you can see the issues are now flowing across 3. Quick caveat, and it mentions it here, there's several known issues. One of them is like the velocity calculation is a bit off, but it's good enough for now. It's a work in progress. The other thing you can do is there's the concept of a velocity override. This is purely for experimentation and what-if scenarios. It's not changing reality. It's not changing the work you actually did in the past. But you can just say, okay, what if our velocity going forward changed? You know, it was, instead of 19, it was 10. When would we get that? Like if we added another head count, for example, or did something that we think we would increase our velocity in some way. And, well, or in this case, decrease it. And you can see it flowed to 3. Well, what if we dropped it more? What if we made it like 6? And you can see then it flows it to even more iterations, because you can't fit but 1 iteration in the first one. So that's the demo of this and why we're doing it in support of this OKR. It's a work in progress. Any and all feedback is welcome, but we're hoping that this will let us come up with some ways to have reality-based, useful predictive value through our process of estimation, and be able to give realistic and reasonable estimates that we have a high degree of confidence in of delivery. Thanks a lot. Bye.